Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective, another show in which we're going to try and get to the bottom of a controversial issue, The Death of the Left, a book written by Professor Emeritus Steve Hall, and a book which really also triggers questions about the state of politics in Britain today. Too often what we're seeing is mainstream media giving us, as you like, the kind of superficial dialogue and discussion around politics. But there's something deeper going on within British politics, which is pretty cataclysmic. And I think this book, along with The Rise of the Far Right, which is another book which our guest today has authored, is going to hopefully shed light on the deeper aspects of what's going on in British politics today and why we're seeing, for instance, the rise of the far right and Farage, but also at the same time seeing chaos within the left. Welcome to the show, Steve. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So it's a big topic, and of course we're going to try and make it easy for people, but we've seen the left kind of in chaos, and people would say, well, you're wrong, because Keir Starmer is the left and he's in power at the moment. And he represents Labour. I saw a tweet, I think, today that came across from Craig Murray, a well-known former ambassador of Britain and somebody who's been very much on the front line in terms of exposing all sorts of nefarious issues around politics in this country. But he literally accused Keir Starmer of being a toy of deep state. But let's start with your book first. What made you write this book? What was it about the left that triggered this? And what was the prequel to this? The rise of the far right.
Well, we wrote The Rise of the Right, that book in 2016 after years of ethnographic research among some of the far-right organisations that were burgeoning in the old industrial areas of the northeast. Myself, I'm one of the co-authors of The Rise of the Right, Simon Winlow. We're from the northeast, from the heart of the old industrial working class. And we noticed a marked shift away from left-wing thinking, the left-wing history, left-wing traditions amongst former voters of the Labour Party, people who once traditionally and habitually almost voted for the Labour Party, and they were moving away from the Labour Party or the left that they thought the Labour Party represented. And some of them were veering to the far right. They were listening to nationalist voices. And of course, we weren't exactly annoyed, we weren't exactly ignored, but we were treated with a little bit of hostility, perhaps a little bit of suspicion amongst our academic colleagues, because of course they had an idea, they had a view of these people as out and out racists and fascists from long ago, as if they were connected to the old National Front and these quite horrific organisations that existed and had a bit of a heyday in the 1970s. And we found that they were different people altogether. They didn't have any connections to the old National Front. Most of them didn't. I'd never heard of it. And indeed, they were fresh meat to the far right, former Labour voters, a lot of them, from traditional unionised jobs, who had seen their areas decay, become derelict almost after de-industrialisation of the 80s and 90s. So Thatcherite de-industrialisation is the context and the backdrop to all of this. And the Labour Party was powerless to do anything about Thatcherite deindustrialisation. In fact, Margaret Thatcher famously, didn't she? She said that one of her greatest achievements was Tony Blair. And in fact, deindustrialisation accelerated under the Blairite regime from 1997 up until 2010. So although they were pumping money into the economy and various financial means of doing this, the jobs were getting, good jobs were becoming very, very thin on the ground. And the security that they once had with the industrial jobs, the tales that they heard from their fathers about how secure life was, and how relatively really happy it was, in the 60s and 70s. Despite this tale we get about the 70s suffering from stagflation and strikes, people seem to have good memories of the 70s, of secure jobs and going on holiday and going to see the football at the weekend, of the sort of industrial rhythm of life still being quite predictable and quite secure. And they saw that the Labour Party not only couldn't do anything about this, but seemed to be actively promoting the sort of economic model and the sort of politics that was behind de-industrialization. In other words, neoliberalism. The Labour Party had become neoliberalized. And we all know that the neoliberal model is based on neoclassical economics, which believes in the privatization and marketization of everything. Well, and we're seeing that now, the Thames Water and all of these disasters of privatization. And we, of course, automation, the PC entered the workforce in the 70s and the 80s, and that was putting a lot of administrative workers out of work. One of the biggest employers around the Northeast were the local authorities. And the schools and administrative work all over the place. And those jobs started to become thin on the ground. The Labour Party couldn't do anything about them. So there was a political vacuum forming. And they're starting to lose faith and lose trust in the Labour Party, even though many of them still habitually, just out of habit, voted Labour. You'd never vote Conservative. Only a few voted Conservative. This vacuum was appearing. And in that vacuum, of course, that's the space in which alternative politics start to operate and start to become more successful.
Well, Nigel Farage does seem to have capitalised on this and bringing it to the present. We will dip back into a lot of what you've unearthed from the past. But Farage and his policies, of course, they seem to focus on immigration, for instance, which is a favourite old right-wing kind of theme, if you like. He's also capitalising on the failure of the economy, of course, post-Brexit and even pre-Brexit, there was a kind of a decline. So these are two very powerful, if you like, narratives which will play very much and are playing into the hands of the right. Was there kind of a sign of this, before the rise of reform? Could you see this beginning to pan out for the far right, if you like, or even the right as we know it now within reform, because they're further to the right than the Tories, quite clearly?
Yes, and certainly, there have been racist elements amongst the British middle class, the British working class, and certainly amongst the British imperial elite. We can just, the rantings of Winston Churchill and others are well known, but certainly this racism, this idea of cultural supremacy was filtered down into the working class through the middle classes, and some of them bought into it. There's been an element of racism for a very long time, and founded in imperial sense of ethnic supremacy, imperialism. Well, we know that. But of course, after the Race Relations Act in 1970, the left was becoming more and more powerful, more and more influential. It was starting to erode those racist elements and become certainly more internationalist and certainly more intercultural and multicultural in its outlook. I remember the old Rock Against Racism concerts and well attended in the 1970s, 1980s. And the left was the cultural left was starting to gain some traction because there are good elements of the cultural left. There are some certainly destructive elements, which I want to talk about in a minute, if that's okay. So things were slowly improving. And also, it's not what we found wasn't the pan-racism. In fact, people from the West Indies and African descent were becoming more and more accepted. Irish were well integrated because that was the first, hostility we saw with Irish immigrants after the potato famine, who were strike breaking, and they were, undercutting wages at the bottom end of the market. And there's still a lot of evidence to suggest that some immigrants at the bottom ends of the labour market are undercutting wages and keeping wages low. And some of the victims, the greatest victims of this, are recent immigrants who are trapped in the bottom of the end of the labour market themselves. So there is some truth in it. Everything boils down to economics at the end of the day, we find. But it wasn't a pan-racism. It was a racism that was tended to be levelled at Islam, at Muslims more than anyone else. Not so much as Afro-Caribbeans, Hindus, and certainly not the Irish. That sort of thing had passed with as the Good Friday, after the Good Friday Agreement. One of the only good things the Blairites did had softened relationships with Ireland and the Irish, and that sort of anti-Irish supremacism was starting to fade away. So it was specifically aimed at Muslims.
So extending this question of immigration, of course, and you raised racism within that, but there is something new about the far right, and let's talk about the far right specifically in this, who are really, in a way, pulling British politics, it seemed, even further to the right. So reform popping up means that the Tories have to move a little bit further to the right. The reform are obviously dragging it out, and that means the far right can get even further right, if you like, which is partly then also exacerbated by allegations and accusations that actually a lot of this far right activity is being organised and engineered and financed, perhaps by Zionists and other nefarious forces. Is there any truth in that, do you think?
Well, we don't have any extensive evidence of that, other than the fact that when we interviewed members of the English Defence League, everyone, bar none, were supportive of Israel's right to defend itself and Israel's right to exist. So they had been to some extent Zionized. And we thought this was odd, because how can the politics of the Middle East filter down to the unemployed former industrial workers of small towns and cities in the north of England? What has that got to do with them? How does this filter through? So there must have been some activity, there must have been some active reaching out to these people in order to try to convert them to the Zionist cause. But we only have that evidence that we collected when we interviewed members of the English Defence League. We also found that the Islamophobia was quite deep. And as I say, the relations towards other ethnic groups had softened somewhat, And we also found that there were actually some Hindu and Afro-Caribbean, only a very small minority, members of these far-right groups, and they were friendly with these white working class activists. So it's a complex picture.
Yeah, and you're obviously unveiling the tip of the iceberg, perhaps. Tommy Robinson, of course, hit the headlines and still is. I'm not sure whether they're releasing him now or whether they have. I haven't followed too much about him just lately, but Tommy Robinson has really become the boy wonder of the far right in that sense, and he definitely has links with Israel. He's had links with Zionists, and he's been an open advocate. So if he's anything to go by, what you're saying is a distinct possibility, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, Tommy Robinson's an agitator. He's not the EDL. He's not the far right, but he is an agitator, and he has proven links with Israel. But he's been on paid holidays to Israel, and no one knows who pays for his rather expensive house. I think it's in Bedfordshire or somewhere like that. We don't know who pays for this house, but he's obviously connected to some sort of deep state movement. Now, these deep state movements tend to be international. They do, it's not Mossad or MI6, because these deep state organizations work together, and they work together for the Western cause. And the problem we face today is this is a new enemy, and some people aren't really getting this. And I want to put a little bit of flesh on that side, if it's all right with you. We're not facing the old hardline nationalists and fascists of the 1920s and 1930s, who were their principal, their politics were about defending their national territories and protecting their industries. It was a protectionist movement more than anything else, especially after the 1929 crash. You have to remember that the Nazi Party only got 2.8% of the vote in 1928, despite the rhetoric of Die Stürmer, all the anti-Semitism and this awful, hateful rhetoric. They only got 2.8% of the vote. It was after the Wall Street crash had decimated their economy and spread poverty around Europe that that the Nazi Party got in 1933, still just scraped in 1933. It was a nationalist protectionist movement. This lot, Farage, Tice, Reform, are globalists. Farage is a former commodity broker. Tice is a businessman. They're all neoliberals. They all have strong connections to America. And they're not protectionists. They're not nationalists at all. They believe in the global free market. And of course, there is an argument, which I think I have some time for, to suggest that the global free market is part of the problem. Because the investors who were making money out of industry in Britain, America, and Europe throughout the 19th and up to the mid 20th century saw their profits fall from 1945. And from 1980, when the neoliberals gained power, in 79 in this country, 1980 in America, and of course this filtered through Europe when, when America sneezes, Europe catches a cold, as they say. America controlling Europe, European vassal states. Neoliberalism became the order of the day. And of course, they disinvested. They pulled out of Western industry, and they started to fund industry development, South Korea, China, Indonesia, you name it. So they were responsible for the de-industrialization that causes this vacuum. And there's nothing in the Reform Manifesto that suggests that in any way it's prepared to reindustrialize Britain, prepared to use public spending to repair infrastructure, to nationalize water, but they did, oddly, offer to nationalize steel, not water, not rail, not energy, but steel, because they see steel and other metals like aluminium as essential for a war economy. So that means that, that they are starting to think in terms of like that foolish woman from Estonia, Callas, and von der Leyen and Stoltz and all the rest of these people, that we might be looking for war. Well, now, whether it's Russia or Iran, we don't know. So they're willing to protect some assets connected to the war economy, but they're not prepared to invest publicly in other assets and other industry in Britain. So there's something very, very fishy about reform. They're not standard nationalists, far-right nationalists by any means.
Yeah, it does seem to be a kind of new beast, and quite conveniently positioning itself exactly where the fears of Britain are, really. So, immigration, being flooded by foreigners, and then that triggering the fear. People don't have to be racist to be scared of the idea of being their culture change necessary. So many people who are middle class, just normal, perhaps not even racist people, are also attracted to reform as a result, perhaps.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, that's far more dangerous than having a far-right party, a genuine far-right party, because people know what that stands for, and they rejected it sort of from time immemorial, I guess, here in Britain. But this new threat, this new danger of this kind of far-right disguised in suits and looking like it's kind of something which the ordinary British person could trust, is partly rising because of the left's lack of ability to unite and propose a solution which the people could believe in.
Absolutely. And the left's created a vacuum. Now, the fortunate, you mentioned the word fear. Now, the far right, they're cleverer than that, unfortunately. What this vacuum creates isn't fear, but anxiety. Now, anxiety is fear without an object. Anxiety is this sense that there's something wrong, there's something out there, there's something threatening us, and we can see the effects of that in the dereliction of our communities and the lack of decent jobs, the inability to pay for basic provisions. I mean, 60% of Americans are struggling to pay for basic provisions. That's a pretty bad... They've got a lower... put PPP, there's this parity in purchase, the purchasing ability compared to prices, lower than China. And British PPP in the lower ends of the labour market and the lower ends of the social spectrum is very, very low too. It creates anxiety. Now, in a situation of anxiety where you're worried about something but you don't know what it is, it's very easy to create your own ideological objects of fear. Now, what they should be frightened of is neoliberalism, because this is what de-industrializes, this is what privatizes, this is what sucks out money out of countries through private debt. And the more that Rachel Reeves is inviting BlackRock over to suck more of the money out of the country, just like the Canadian pension funds have been, destroying Thames water by simply funneling out money into their pockets instead of reinvesting it and spending it in the economy to boost aggregate demand. So this is what they should be afraid of, but they've never told anything. All this is denied. The mass media don't talk about it. The education system are rather tentative about it. So it's easy for racists, for nationalists, in fact, for anyone, for any YouTube grifter to move in, like, I don't know whether it's Russell Brand or whoever, just to move in and start to create the objects of fear and the objects of hope in this sort of vacuum of anxiety. And the left have utterly failed to bring the real object of fear, neoliberalism, into stark relief. That's because the left has been completely taken in by neoliberalism. Rachel Reeves is a neoliberal. They're all neoliberals in Starmer's cabinet, and they're all refusing to tell people what they should be scared of. So it's very, very easy for anyone to move in. Racists, fascists, weird YouTube grifters. It's a bit like the collapse of the Bronze Age in 1100 BC for 500 years before the Axial Age, when the big revealed religions start to form themselves, when any grifter prophet could walk around Corinth or somewhere like that spouting off a lot of nonsense, and people would start to believe them. So we're in this sort of interregnum. And I think it was the old Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci who said that in the interregnum is a time of monsters. Well, and we see monsters growing.
Well, I'm trying to now figure out whether there is a credible opposition, because it seems as though the right has got the wind in the sail and they are attracting voters. They're very much winning on the local elections. But on the left, of course, Jeremy Corbyn was the last great hope for that kind of left, the traditional left. What we've got now is Keir Starmer, who, as you've put it, again, I'll take your kind of assessment on this, that basically he and his cabinet are essentially neoliberals, no different from Tony Blair, therefore no different from Rishi Sunak or any of the Tory predecessors. But then, of course, this reform movement, which is, for all we know, it may merge with the Tories at some point. It may be they may fancy their chances to win the election outright as well. It's not clear. But either way, I don't see them, as you've pointed out, I don't see them changing anything. And the public, in its ignorance, may well go for it. They may well vote for more.
But they'll just vote for another bunch of neoliberals. Because neoliberals now are like shapeshifters. They'll simply adopt the guise of some other party, some other political philosophy, or some other economic model. But although they keep quiet about economic models, of course, because the neoliberalism is what they believe, and they'll try to sustain neoliberalism. The reason they're trying to sustain neoliberalism is hitting the rocks, because it's turning countries into private debt zombies who can't pay their debts. Neoliberalism is a financial system at its root. It's not a real economy. It's not a real economic system. It's built around finance, money lending, and private equity and private investment, privatization. That's what neoliberalism is about.
Well,
it's about the collapse. So it has to try to infiltrate, and quite successfully, every political movement it possibly can, so that we're now simply moving from one neoliberal movement to the next. And Farage and Tice are just standard neoliberals. They'll pretend to be nationalists, fascists. Nothing will happen with reform. Will do nothing. Nothing at all.
That mirrors, of course, what's going on in America. And you've raised America a few times. The US and Donald Trump is basically going in and presenting himself again as a people person, somebody who's going to put America first. But all his policies, again, seem to be doing everything to help the neoliberal corporates again. Because if you're going to do tariffs.
He tried to convince people he's protectionist by setting up these tariffs, and the following day he collapsed them all.
Yeah,
this is pantomime politics. It's absurd. What worries me, Saeed, is that there are people out there who are actually believing this stuff. They're believing that this pantomime that is being played out in front of them is real. There's nothing real about it. And the reason there's nothing real is, as you say, Corbyn, and to some extent Sanders, although I didn't take Sanders too seriously, but Corbyn certainly was the last stand, was Custer's last stand of the left. And even Corbyn's economics programme, after John McDonnell was got at by various advisors whose names I won't mention, that caused rows on social media. Even Corbyn's politics were economics. Even Corbyn's economics were compromised because his shadow chancellor was as worried about public investment as anyone else. So I think that the public investment that Corbyn that we need massive public investment to reboot this economy. We need to take energy, rail, and all of these huge infrastructural assets and utilities back into public ownership. And we need to reboot the National Health Service. We need education back into public. And we need free education again, and we need proper education, and not like the ideology we're getting at the moment. And even Corbyn was rather worried about the amount of public, because as soon as you breathe the word about public investment, you get attacked by the bond markets, the foreign exchange markets, devalue your currency, cause inflation, and cause a public outcry. Of course, we're an import-dependent country. That makes imports more expensive. Businesses start to close, and you're in, and then you're out as quick as Liz Truss. So that's what they're worried about.
So that gives us a really good insight into what's causing this problem. In terms of solutions for the last 10 minutes or so, I want to focus on how this tide can be, if you like, turned. Of course, Corbynism being the last hope has left a lot of the left side of politics in tatters, and of course sold out, it seems, by the neoliberal Starmer. Are we on an inexorable slide towards economic and political downfall? Because let's put it in perspective. China is rising rapidly, and the transnational corporates are investing in China, and China has done exactly what you've just outlined to counter neoliberalism. What they've invested in infrastructure, they've developed their industries, and they've essentially thrived and are rapidly rising as the new global economic power. And America's answer is to start wars all over the place to somehow stop them.
Yes, I mean, any success other than neoliberalism must be demonized, or if it starts to become popular and successful, it must be crushed. And look, take the example of Libya, 2011. Now, after 2008 crash, the Labour Party and then the Conservative Party in 2010 were completely powerless to do anything about the terrible effects of the crash. They imposed austerity. They blame government spending rather than private lending. Yeah, they blame government spending and they enforce austerity all over America and Europe, which was part of another cause for the rise of the right and the cause of the anxiety that I was talking about. In the meantime, China is developing its economy through its policy banks, which are state-backed. And it has a very successful mixed economy model. It was combining some private investment with an awful lot of state investment in infrastructure. I mean, you should see some of the bullet trains it's got, the new metro stations, building bridges in the sky, all with public money. Low inflation, 90% of people there owning their own houses. They've got higher PPP, that's purchasing parity, than America. Nobody's starving. They've lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty. Oh, that's too successful. We don't want that model, because the one thing the private investors are terrified of, and that is public investment crowding out their. This is very simple. Their private investment is their business, because they charge money, interest, on their loans, and they want yields on their bonds, and they want to be able to trade currencies on open markets in order to make profits, huge profits. It's basically parasitic.
So if the
it's a lending operation, and if that public ownership comes in to crowd them out, it simply takes half or 2/3 or 3/4 of their business away from them. And they just don't want that.
If somebody was to move in, if a politician or a party or a movement was to rise up and expose all this and convince the British public or the American public that actually they've been hoodwinked and they're being mugged, basically, by the capitalist, neoliberal, corporate, nexus, would they stand any chance? Because let's take, for instance, the Corporation of London in the city, which has a stranglehold over maybe 30-40% of British service industry, the British economy in general. Perhaps that's a liberal guess, or maybe a conservative one, but I'm guessing it's around that. It has a very powerful hold on our economy here. Say they were to say, okay, you've got this movement which wants to challenge us, challenge money power. Well, we're just going to shift all our computers, move out of the city and go over to Frankfurt or somewhere else and leave you high and dry, collapse your economy here and let Britain go back to being farmers and shopkeepers and perhaps just a third world economy. Is that the fear that people perhaps have if they were to trust any movement which said, look, let's get rid of these parasites?
Yes, I mean, I can add a little bit of detail to that. It gets just a little complex, and bear with me for a minute. If you do talk to Phil Bevan about that, they say a huge amount of deals. Let's take this back to Operation Fish after the during the Second World War. If Hitler had invaded and taken over this country, Churchill and his cronies in the City of London, don't forget the City of London has been there since 1067. It's been looking after the national finances for 1,000 years. That really knows what it's doing. And it created, after the war, the Eurodollar market. Now, Keynes had convinced the Western nations to set up capital controls, to stop trading capital around all over the place and to stop moving around all over the place and to keep some of it in the countries of its origin, to reinvest in industry and therefore keep industry going. Now, the City of London, in cahoots with Wall Street, its partner in crime, circumvented these capital controls through the Eurodollar market by using the old British imperial tax havens like Cayman Islands, Jersey, etc., to filter this money around, to circumvent Keynes's capital controls, convert it into dollars and shove it into European banks, which they could use as basically their reserve accounts. So this scam was set up straight away. So Keynesian capital controls were circumvented. Neoliberalism simply institutionalized this and deregulated. First thing Thatcher did was get rid of capital controls in 1979. So capital can flow freely wherever it wants. Don't forget, that $166 trillion are traded every day on the Forex, bond and stock market. Now, just get your head around that for a second.
Wow.
That's power. That's what we call money market power.
Now, concluding remarks.
Unless we confront that head on, unless we do something about that, they have enormous power. Bond markets. James Carville, who was the one-time aide of President Clinton, said that if he's reincarnated and wanted to come back as the most powerful being in the world, like some Marvel sort of Thanatos or something like that, he would come back as the bond market, because the bond market has that power. But it only has that power because our politicians allow it to have that power. And that's the problem.
My final question, is there any hope in the near or even the medium-term future that the real left, or the real party which actually acts in the interests of ordinary people, let's not label it, is there any sign of kind of green shoots of such a movement rising?
No, but there could be. What we need is an economically literate left. An economically literate left populated by people who understand how the global financial system works. People like Michael Hudson, Steve Keen, and even, myself to some extent. I'm not as good as those two because I'm a bit of a polymath. I look at other areas too. We need to educate ourselves and understand how this finance system works, because that's what it is. It's a financial system. It's not an economic system. It's a financial system. And we can confront it head on. We don't need to sell bonds, because we have currency issue, we have fiat currencies we can issue as public investment and public spending. We don't need to sell bonds. The stock market is shaky anyway, because of, you know, the things that people like Donald Trump have done. The stock market's been shaky for a long time. The problem is the Forex market. I mean, that's about $6.6 trillion, but every day being traded. They can do an immense amount of damage by simply devaluing currencies, selling off currencies, devaluing and making the imports more expensive. Businesses start closing, people get angry, and the government ends up getting, you know, being chucked out. It's all quite simple when you look at its root. We need a party that's willing to take that on. There will be sacrifices, and we will need to subsidise. Public investment will need to subsidise businesses and keep them going during the hard times. We could have avoided stagflation in the 1970s by putting a 10% subsidy on oil-using industries that were struggling, to get over stagflation. And we could have stopped the banks lending out some money and getting people into private debt so that most of their profits were going back into repaying interest payments. We could have done something about it. We needed politicians. At the time, we had some politicians that could have done something about it, people like Tony Benn, Peter Shaw, but they were pushed out of the Labour Party by the proto-Blairites who were starting to take over the party in the 70s and have got us in this position. And also, just to finish off, capitalism is destroying itself because it's simply turning whole nations into private debt zombies. And when nations can't pay back their debts, and if BlackRock get their hooks into Africa, into Ukraine, into this country, Reeves is inviting BlackRock over to once people can't pay their debts back, you have a collapse. You have a financial collapse. And at that point, it's up to the left to be ready and prepared with an alternative economic model, something like the mixed market economy that works in China, and persuade people that this is the only way forward. So until we have a left with that knowledge and with that determination, and with that backbone, then we're going to be in trouble. But it is possible, because this system is not going to last forever.
Well, Professor Steve Hall, thank you so much. It's been a fascinating journey. We covered the far right, we've looked at the left, we've looked at the fundamental problem of neoliberalism and a financial system which is essentially subjugating and, it seems, exploiting ordinary people. We've discussed the fact that ordinary people have an economic illiteracy or financial illiteracy, which leaves them vulnerable to picking the sort of leaders which are just going to do more of the same, whether it was Thatcher, whether it was Blair, whether it's Starmer, or whether it will be Nigel Farage next. All are of the same hue. That seems to be a big problem, that we don't have a choice or a party that's recognized for supporting the people rather than bowing to these transnational corporations and money power in the background. That's, I guess, the departing message that I've got. We need to wake up, I think, learn a little bit more about economics and not trust most of these mainstream politicians. They seem to be all part of the same sellout fraternity, which is more inclined towards the money mafia than you, the public out there. Thank you once again to Professor Steve Hall, and I'm sure we're going to revisit this topic again and again. But until the next show, do please like, share, and subscribe to Deep Dive Perspective so that we can bring you more of these kind of eye-opening reality shows in the future. Thank you.